The shroud was not a painting, not a scorch, or not a photograph.
Well, you see this when you see the shroud in negative. Like, Jamie, pull up an image of it. It's very strange. Like, it shows the lash marks on his body. Yeah. It shows his facial features. It shows the holes where his wrist is, where he was crucified.
When you look at the shroud in its negative form, seriously, pull up an image. It becomes incredibly unsettling. Details start appearing that shouldn't even be visible. You can make out what look like scourge marks across the body, distinct facial features, even wounds at the wrists consistent with crucifixion. Barry Schwarz stood there, staring at the DNA report in his hands, his fingers shaking. After dedicating more than 4 decades to studying the Shroud of Turin, he believed he had seen it all. He hadn't. The genetic data taken from the fibers didn't match anything researchers expected, not medieval Europeans who handled it, not Italian conservators, not even populations from ancient Palestine. Instead, the sequences pointed to regions that made no logical sense. The results were so bizarre that multiple geneticists refused to officially validate them. When Schwarz pressed the lead scientist for answers, her response stuck with him. She admitted she didn't know what they were looking at, and neither did anyone else. In fact, some researchers preferred not to dig any deeper at all. That's when it hit him. This wasn't just confusion within the scientific community. There was something closer to fear. But to understand why this discovery has caused such unease behind laboratory doors, you have to go back to how Schwarz got involved in the first place. Because his journey, from skeptic to one of the most recognized experts on the shroud, is just as astonishing as the evidence itself. Their team eventually published their findings after 3 years of intense research in peer-reviewed scientific journals. But even that only scratched the surface. Think about this for a moment. Whoever preserved that burial cloth risked everything. At the time, Roman authorities executed people for far less. So, ask yourself honestly, would anyone risk their life to save a random piece of cloth? Or would that kind of risk only make sense if they truly believed the person it wrapped had done the impossible? The very existence of the shroud raises questions that history doesn't comfortably answer. It all began in 1978. Back then, Barry Schwarz was a highly respected technical photographer, trusted by NASA for some of their most sensitive imaging work. When he was invited to join a scientific investigation of the Shroud in Turin, he didn't take it seriously at all. In fact, he was convinced it was nothing more than a medieval forgery. To him, it was an easy job. Fly to Italy, expose the fake within hours, and enjoy the rest of the trip. A free vacation with a quick conclusion. He even joked about it at the time. But everything changed the moment he saw it in person. There was something about the image that didn't fit anything they knew. It didn't resemble any painting, photograph, or known artistic technique. For 5 straight days and nights, the team worked non-stop, running test after test. Schwarz captured detailed images of every fiber, every marking, every tiny feature embedded in the cloth. And slowly, his confidence began to fade. There were no brushstrokes, no pigments, no signs of any traditional method used to create an image. It wasn't painted, burned, or produced using any known process. And yet, it existed. At one point, Schwarz tried to step away. Twice, actually. He told himself it wasn't his problem. After all, he was Jewish. Why should he devote his life to a Christian relic? But something about the shroud kept pulling him back. Then came a turning point, when Don Lin joined the project. Lin wasn't just another scientist. He had worked on major space missions like Voyager and Galileo. He was one of NASA's top imaging experts. When he spoke, people paid attention. During a meeting, Schwarz finally asked the question that had been bothering him. Why was he even there? Lin's response was simple, but it landed hard. Jesus was Jewish too, he said. Then he leaned in and added something that made the moment feel heavier. Maybe there was a reason Schwarz had been chosen to be part of this. Those words stayed with him. Lin told him to go to Turin, do his job as best as he could, and trust that the bigger picture would reveal itself in time. Schwarz had no idea then just how deeply this mystery would take hold of his life. As the research continued over the next 3 years, the team pushed every scientific test they could think of to its limits. But instead of finding answers, they kept uncovering more questions, each one stranger than the last. They went into this investigation with one clear goal: expose the shroud as an elaborate hoax, prove it beyond doubt, and then move on with their careers. But that's not what happened. Instead, they kept running into one dead end after another. Every test they conducted ruled things out rather than providing answers. There was no trace of paint, no dye, no burn marks from heat, no chemical residue from any known photographic process. Nothing. Absolutely nothing that could explain how the image was created. And here's the part most people miss. It wasn't just that they couldn't figure out how it was made. Their research, carefully reviewed and published in respected scientific journals, actually demonstrated something far more unsettling. No known technology from any period in human history could produce an image with these exact properties. Let that really sink in. We've landed advanced machines on Mars. We've decoded the human genome. We can split atoms. But recreating the image on the Shroud of Turin? Still impossible. When their findings were finally released, you might expect backlash, debate, or at least serious attempts to challenge their conclusions. But instead, there was silence. No major rebuttals, no strong academic counterarguments. Just a quiet, uneasy lack of response. Almost as if no one wanted to touch the subject at all. Now, this is where Schwarz's story takes a more personal turn. Because even after witnessing all of this evidence firsthand, he still refused to believe the shroud was real. For nearly 18 years, he held on to his skepticism. And the reason came down to one detail: blood. The stains visible on the cloth were still red. And anyone with basic forensic knowledge knows that blood doesn't stay red. Once exposed to air, it darkens to a brownish color fairly quickly. That single inconsistency was enough to keep Schwarz from accepting everything else he had seen. If you're finding this investigation intriguing, stick with me, because what comes next is the piece that changed everything for him. In 1995, Schwarz received a phone call that would completely overturn his understanding of the shroud. On the other end was Dr. Alan Adler, a Harvard-trained biochemist, a leading authority in blood chemistry, and a respected researcher with a reputation for precision and credibility. When Adler spoke about blood evidence, people paid attention. His voice that day was serious, more intense than usual. He told Schwarz that the blood found on the shroud contained unusually high levels of bilirubin. Schwarz didn't immediately grasp the significance. So, he asked the obvious question: what does that mean? Adler explained that when a person goes through extreme physical trauma, severe beating, intense stress, massive injury, the body reacts by flooding the bloodstream with bilirubin. It's part of a shock response. The liver can't keep up, and the levels rise dramatically. And here's the key detail: blood with elevated bilirubin doesn't behave normally. It doesn't darken the way typical dried blood does. It can retain a reddish appearance over time. Schwarz felt everything shift in that moment. For years, the answer had been right in front of him. He just didn't have the biochemical background to interpret it correctly. And just like that, the doubt that had held him back for nearly 2 decades disappeared. To him, the conclusion became unavoidable. The shroud wasn't just possibly authentic. It was exactly what it claimed to be: the burial cloth of Jesus of Nazareth. But the story doesn't stop there, because the most unsettling part came later, with the DNA analysis. When scientists finally managed to extract genetic material from the fibers, they expected something predictable: traces from European handlers, medieval caretakers, restorers. Centuries of contact should have left a clear genetic footprint. That's not what they found. Instead, the DNA revealed markers from multiple widely separated regions. Yes, there were Middle Eastern signatures, which made sense, but there were also traces linked to South Asia, North Africa, even populations that shouldn't logically be connected to a single artifact from 1st century Jerusalem. And here's where it gets even stranger. The distribution of this DNA didn't look random. It didn't resemble typical contamination from handling over time. The patterns were too consistent, too specific, too structured. Some geneticists have quietly admitted that they've never seen anything like it before. It doesn't match any known model, neither natural contamination nor historical movement. And reportedly, some of the researchers involved have been hesitant to publish their full findings. Think about that for a moment. Officially, the mainstream position still labels the shroud as a medieval forgery, Yet the blood evidence points to extreme physical trauma. The image itself can't be replicated by any known method, and the DNA raises more questions than answers. It almost feels like the conclusion was decided in advance, and the evidence was expected to support it. But the evidence isn't cooperating. For years now, some of the more unconventional theories have been quietly passed around within research circles. Behind closed doors, certain scientists have raised concerns about genetic material that doesn't seem to belong to any known population database. Fragments that appear distorted, incomplete, or altered in ways that don't match how DNA normally breaks down over time. And here's the shift. Skeptics aren't confidently explaining this away anymore. They're avoiding it, because taking this evidence seriously could mean stepping into territory that mainstream science isn't prepared to deal with. What if the DNA suggests the Shroud isn't just ancient, but far older than we think? What if those strange genetic markers point to something that challenges our entire understanding of human history? And here's the uncomfortable possibility. What if some in the scientific community have known about these anomalies for years and chose not to bring them into the public spotlight? These aren't random internet theories. These are questions being quietly discussed by qualified researchers, just not in public forums or published papers. The kinds of conversations that seem to stay hidden from peer-reviewed journals. After witnessing firsthand how easily the media could distort the truth, Schwarz reached a turning point. He saw reports that were not just exaggerated, but sometimes completely inaccurate. So, in 1996, he decided to take matters into his own hands. He built Shroud.com from the ground up. Over time, it became the most extensive online resource dedicated to scientific research on the Shroud. Millions of people visit it every year, looking for reliable, unfiltered information. And here's what makes it even more impressive. It was thriving long before Google even existed. Schwarz made one thing absolutely clear. No ads, no sponsors, no outside influence. Just the data. Pure research, accessible to anyone willing to explore it. Then, in 2009, he took it a step further by establishing a non-profit organization focused on preserving and studying the evidence for future generations. Naturally, people began questioning his motivations. Why would someone from a Jewish background devote decades of his life to something so closely tied to Jesus? His answer never changed. He wasn't there to tell people what to believe. His role was to make sure the evidence remained available and intact. But there's a more personal side to this story, one he rarely shares openly. This investigation didn't just impact his career, it changed him. Over time, people stopped asking him about the Shroud itself, and started asking about his own beliefs. What do you think now, Barry? At the age of 50, he found himself confronting a question he had avoided for most of his life. Raised in a traditional Orthodox Jewish family, surrounded by strict customs and deep-rooted traditions, he had spent years distancing himself from all of it, dismissing it as irrelevant. But through this journey, something shifted. In his own quiet reflection, he admitted that what he discovered surprised him. He realized that faith hadn't been absent from his life. It had been there all along, waiting. Barry Schwarz never set out to prove religion right or wrong. He simply followed the evidence. And that evidence led him somewhere unexpected, somewhere modern science still struggles to explain. A place that makes institutions uneasy. A place that forces questions many researchers would rather not ask out loud. The blood analysis points clearly to severe physical trauma. The image itself can't be recreated using any known method. And the DNA findings, those are what continue to trouble even experienced scientists. So, now it comes down to this. What do you believe? Is the Shroud of Turin genuine evidence tied to the resurrection? Or is it the most advanced and mysterious fabrication ever created, made with techniques that remain beyond our understanding even today? Either way, the implications are enormous. I want to hear your thoughts. Drop them in the comments below. And if you're interested in exploring more hidden history, the kind most mainstream platforms avoid, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Because this story, it's only just getting started. But here's where the story takes an even deeper turn. One that most discussions never fully explore. Because the biggest mystery surrounding the Shroud isn't just the image, or even the DNA. It's the timing. Multiple independent analyses have tried to date the cloth, and the results haven't always aligned. Some tests suggest a medieval origin, while others strongly hint at something far older, and that contradiction alone has kept the debate alive for decades. Now ask yourself, how can the same object produce completely different timelines? Some researchers believe contamination may have altered the samples. Others argue that repairs done centuries later could have skewed the results. But there's a growing group that isn't satisfied with either explanation. They believe we might be looking at something far more complex. Because if the dating is unreliable, then the entire narrative around the shroud becomes unstable. And when a narrative breaks down, new possibilities emerge. There are scientists who've quietly suggested that the image itself may not have been created, in the traditional sense, at all. Instead, they propose it could be the result of an unknown burst of energy, something that interacted with the cloth at a molecular level, leaving behind a precise, almost photographic imprint. Not painted, not burned, not printed, but formed. And if that idea sounds extreme, consider this. Modern experiments using high-powered lasers and radiation have attempted to recreate similar effects. Some have come close in limited ways, but none have successfully duplicated the full range of characteristics seen on the shroud. Not the depth and coating, not the surface-level precision, not the chemical composition. It's like trying to copy a masterpiece without knowing the technique that created it. And that raises a question that's hard to ignore. If we can't reproduce it today, with all our advanced technology, then how was it done in the past? This is exactly the kind of question that makes institutions uncomfortable, because it doesn't just challenge a single artifact. It challenges our assumptions about history, science, and what's actually possible. And then there's another layer most people overlook. The image on the shroud isn't just detailed, it's anatomically accurate in ways that weren't fully understood in medieval times. The positioning of the wounds, the flow of the blood, even the proportions of the body all align with modern forensic knowledge. Which leads to another unsettling thought. If it is a forgery, then whoever created it had knowledge that didn't officially exist yet. So, where did that knowledge come from? You start to see the pattern here. Every explanation seems to open the door to even bigger questions. And maybe that's why this mystery has never been resolved. Not because there's no evidence, but because the evidence doesn't fit neatly into any single explanation. It refuses to stay in one category. Science, history, or faith. It sits somewhere in between, and that's what makes it so compelling. Because at the end of the day, the Shroud of Turin forces you to confront something deeper than just facts. It forces you to decide how you interpret the unknown. Is it simply a puzzle we haven't solved yet? Or is it something that was never meant to be fully explained? Think about that. Because the more you look into this, the clearer one thing becomes. This isn't just about a piece of ancient cloth. It's about the limits of what we think we understand,